The rain drummed against the tall windows of the Golden Oak restaurant as Maya wiped down table after table. Her feet ached in the worn black shoes she'd been wearing for the past 6 months. The dinner rush was finally slowing down, but she knew her night was far from over. She still had 3 more hours before closing time. Maya glanced at the old clock hanging above the kitchen door. 9:30. Her mother would be getting ready for bed soon at the small apartment they shared across town. The thought made her move a little faster as she cleared the last plates from table 12. "Maya, you're needed in the private dining room," called out Mr. Peterson, the restaurant manager. He was a kind man in his 50s who always made sure his staff got their breaks on time. "The Harrison party wants fresh water glasses." She nodded and headed toward the back of the restaurant where the private dining room was located. This was where the wealthy customers came to eat when they wanted privacy. The room had expensive paintings on the walls and a beautiful black piano in the corner that no one ever played. Maya had always wondered why they kept it there. As she walked through the main dining area, she caught her reflection in one of the mirrors. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her white shirt was still clean despite the busy evening. She looked tired, but she always tried to smile at the customers. Tips were better when you smiled. Maya had been working at the Golden Oak for almost 2 years now. She'd started right after her dad got sick and couldn't work anymore. Someone had to pay the rent and buy groceries. Someone had to take care of the medical bills that kept piling up even after he passed away last spring. Before all of this happened, Maya had a different life planned out. She was going to study music at the state university. She had even received a scholarship after her audition. The music teacher at her high school said she was one of the most gifted piano players he'd ever taught. But scholarships don't pay for everything, and when her family needed her, the choice was easy. She missed playing piano more than she missed anything else from her old life. Sometimes, late at night when she couldn't sleep, she would sit at the old keyboard in her bedroom and play softly so she wouldn't wake her mother. The keys felt different now. Her fingers weren't as quick as they used to be. Working at the restaurant had made her hands rough, and she didn't practice nearly enough anymore. The private dining room was buzzing with conversation when Maya entered. 8 people sat around the large wooden table, all dressed in expensive suits and jewelry. She recognized some of them from the local newspaper. These were the kind of people who owned big companies and had their pictures taken at charity events. At the head of the table sat a man who looked to be in his early 40s. His gray suit probably cost more than Maya made in 3 months. He was talking loudly about some business deal, while the others listened carefully. This had to be Robert Harrison, the tech billionaire who owned half the buildings downtown. Maya had read about him in the papers. He'd started his company from nothing and built it into something worth billions of dollars. People said he was brilliant but difficult to work with. They said he expected perfection from everyone around him and didn't tolerate mistakes. "Excuse me," Maya said quietly as she approached the table with a pitcher of ice water. "Would anyone like their water? Refreshed?" Most of the guests nodded politely, and Maya began going around the table, filling glasses. The conversation continued around her as if she wasn't there. They were discussing some kind of merger with a company from Japan. The numbers they were throwing around made Maya's head spin. When she reached Harrison's glass, her hand shook slightly. She'd been on her feet for 8 hours straight, and exhaustion was setting in. A few drops of water splashed onto the white tablecloth next to his plate. The conversation stopped immediately. Harrison looked down at the tiny water spots, then up at Maya with cold blue eyes. "Are you kidding me right now?" Maya's heart started racing. "I'm so sorry, sir. Let me get a towel and clean that up right away." "No, stop." His voice was sharp and commanding. The other guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. "Do you see these people around this table? Do you have any idea how important this dinner is?" Maya's face burned with embarrassment. "Yes, sir, I understand. It was an accident, and I apologize. An accident?" Harrison stood up from his chair, making himself seem even more intimidating. "I'm trying to close a $50 million deal here, and you're spilling water like some amateur." One of the other guests, an older woman with kind eyes, looked like she wanted to say something, but she stayed quiet. The tension in the room was thick. Maya could feel tears starting to form, but she fought them back. She couldn't afford to lose this job. "I'm very sorry," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Harrison wasn't finished. He seemed to be enjoying the power he had over her. "You know what? I bet you can't do anything right. Look at this place." He gestured around the elegant dining room. "They have this beautiful piano sitting here, and I bet you can't even play a simple song." Maya's breath caught in her throat. The piano. She looked over at the instrument that had been calling to her for 2 years. Its black surface reflected the soft lighting of the chandelier above. "Go ahead," Harrison continued, his voice getting louder. "Show my guests here what kind of talent this restaurant employs. Play us something. Anything." The other people at the table looked mortified. A man in a navy suit cleared his throat nervously. "Robert, maybe we should just—" "No," Harrison cut him off. "I want to see what she can do. Consider it entertainment for our business dinner." Maya stood frozen, holding the water pitcher in her trembling hands. Every person in the room was staring at her. She could hear the distant sounds of the kitchen staff cleaning up for the night. She thought about her mother at home, probably watching her favorite TV show and drinking the herbal tea that helped with her arthritis. She thought about the stack of medical bills sitting on their kitchen table. She thought about the rent that was due next week. She thought about how much they both depended on this job, but mostly she thought about the piano. The beautiful silent piano that had been waiting in this corner for someone to bring it back to life. Maya hadn't played for an audience since her scholarship audition 3 years ago. That felt like a lifetime ago. Her hands had changed since then. They were harder now, marked by long hours of carrying heavy plates and cleaning tables. But underneath the calluses and the tiredness, her fingers still remembered. They remembered every lesson, every practice session, every song she'd ever learned. Maya looked at Harrison's smug face, then at the uncomfortable expressions of his guests. She thought about walking away, apologizing again, and pretending this never happened. That would be the safe thing to do, the smart thing to do. Instead, she set down the water pitcher on a nearby serving table and walked slowly toward the piano. The room fell completely silent as she approached the bench. Maya's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. She sat down and lifted the piano lid, revealing the pristine black and white keys underneath. For a moment she just sat there, her hands hovering above the keyboard. Then, she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let her fingers find their way home. Maya's fingers touched the piano keys for the first time in months. The cool ivory felt familiar yet strange under her fingertips. She could feel Harrison's eyes burning into her back, waiting for her to embarrass herself even more than she already had. "Well?" Harrison's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "We don't have all night. My guests are very busy people." Maya turned slightly on the piano bench to look at the faces around the table. The older woman with the kind eyes gave her an encouraging nod. A younger man in glasses looked genuinely curious about what might happen next. But Harrison just stood there with his arms crossed, a cruel smile playing at the corners of his mouth. She had played this piano once before, actually. It was during her job interview 2 years ago. Mr. Peterson had mentioned that she used to study music, and he'd asked her to play something. She'd played a simple piece by Bach, and he'd hired her on the spot. But that felt like a different lifetime now. The restaurant had grown quieter around them. Maya could see some of the other waiters and kitchen staff peeking through the doorway. Word had spread quickly about what was happening in the private dining room. She spotted Carlos, the dishwasher who always saved her the good leftover bread rolls. His face looked worried. Maya closed her eyes and tried to remember what her old piano teacher, Mrs. Chen, used to tell her students. "Music isn't about perfection," she would say. "It's about truth. Play what you feel and the audience will feel it too." What did Maya feel right now? Embarrassed, yes. Angry, definitely. But underneath all of that was something else. Something that had been sleeping inside her for too long. It was the part of her that still dreamed even after everything that had happened. She thought about her father. He used to sit in their tiny living room and listen to her practice for hours. He never complained even when she played the same difficult passage over and over again. "My daughter is going to be famous someday," he would tell their neighbors. She's got magic in her fingers. The magic felt rusty now, but maybe it was still there. Maya placed her hands on the keys and began to play. She started with something simple, a melody she'd written herself back in high school. It was soft and gentle, like raindrops on a window. The notes filled the elegant dining room, floating, up toward the crystal chandelier. Harrison shifted impatiently. This wasn't what he'd expected. He'd wanted her to fumble around and prove his point about her being incompetent. Instead, the music was actually quite beautiful. Is that it? Interrupted after about 30 seconds. That's your big performance? It sounds like elevator music. Maya's hands faltered and the melody died away. She felt her cheeks burning again. Maybe he was right. Maybe she should just apologize and go back to serving water and clearing tables. Maybe she was fooling herself about having any talent left. But then she remembered something else. Last month, she'd been cleaning the restaurant after closing time when she found herself alone with the piano. Without thinking, she'd sat down and started playing a piece she'd been working on before her father got sick. It was something she'd composed during those long nights in the hospital, sitting by his bedside. The piece was different from anything she'd ever written before. It wasn't pretty or polite. It was raw and honest. It talked about loss and fear and the weight of responsibility that had fallen on her shoulders when she was barely 21 years old. But it also talked about strength and hope and the way music could heal things that medicine couldn't touch. Maya looked up at Harrison, and something in her expression changed. The nervous, apologetic waitress was gone. In her place sat someone who had survived things he couldn't imagine, someone who had sacrificed her dreams but hadn't forgotten them. "You want to hear something real?" she asked quietly. Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me? You said this sounds like elevator music. You want to hear something that isn't polite or safe or designed to make people comfortable while they eat expensive food?" The guests around the table leaned forward slightly. This wasn't what any of them had expected from the evening. The woman with kind eyes actually smiled. Harrison looked annoyed but curious. "Fine. Show me what you've got, but make it quick." Maya turned back to the piano and cracked her knuckles. This time she didn't close her eyes. She kept them wide, open, looking straight ahead at the music stand where someone had left an old songbook. But she wasn't going to play anything from that book. She was going to play her story. The first notes came out low and deep, like a heartbeat. Then the melody began to climb, slowly at first, then with growing intensity. This wasn't the gentle rain music from before. This was a storm. Maya's fingers moved across the keys with growing confidence. 2 years of carrying heavy trays and scrubbing tables hadn't stolen her technique. If anything, the physical work had made her hands stronger. The difficult passages that used to challenge her felt easier now. The music told the story of a girl who had to grow up too fast. It spoke of midnight shifts at the hospital and morning shifts at the restaurant. It talked about dreams deferred but not destroyed. It sang of love for a parent who couldn't be saved and responsibility for a parent who still needed care. Harrison stopped smiling. The cruel expression on his face gradually shifted to something else. Confusion, maybe, or recognition. The other guests were completely silent now, caught up in the emotional journey Maya was taking them on. In the doorway, more restaurant staff had gathered. Mr. Peterson stood there with his arms crossed, but not in an angry way. He looked proud. Some of the other waitresses were wiping their eyes. Maya's composition built to a powerful climax, her fingers flying across the keys in a complex passage that would have impressed any music professor. But this wasn't about showing off her technical skills. This was about 15 minutes of every day for the past 2 years when she let herself remember who she used to be and who she might still become. As the music reached its peak, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Joy. Pure, undiluted joy at making something beautiful in a world that often felt harsh and unfair. Her body swayed with the rhythm, and for a moment she forgot about everything except the conversation she was having with the piano. The piece began to wind down, becoming gentler, but no less intense. The final notes were like a whisper. A promise. That even when everything seemed impossible, there was still music left to be made. Maya played the last chord and let it ring out in the silence. Then she slowly lifted her hands from the keys and placed them in her lap. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the distant clatter of dishes being washed in the kitchen. Harrison stood frozen beside his chair, staring at Maya as if he'd never seen her before. His mouth was slightly open, and the arrogant expression had completely disappeared from his face. Finally, the older woman with kind eyes began to clap, slowly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. One by one, the other guests joined in. Then, the restaurant staff in the doorway. Soon the entire room was filled with applause. Maya sat on the piano bench, hardly believing what had just happened. She had done it. She had played her truth, and people had listened. The applause seemed to go on forever, but Maya barely heard it. She sat at the piano bench, her hands still trembling from the performance. Her heart was beating so fast, she thought it might burst, right out of her chest. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She had actually done it. She had played her composition in front of strangers, and they had listened. Harrison was the only person in the room not clapping. He stood beside his chair like a statue, his face pale and confused. Maya could see something working behind his eyes, like he was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. The older woman with kind eyes was the first to stop clapping. She stood up from her chair and walked around the table toward Maya. Her dress was elegant and expensive, the kind Maya had only seen in magazines, but her smile was warm and genuine. "That was absolutely incredible," the woman said, extending her hand to Maya. "I'm Dr. Catherine Walsh. I run the Walsh Foundation for the Arts." Maya's eyes widened. She had heard of the Walsh Foundation. They gave scholarships to young musicians and funded music programs in schools that couldn't afford them. Dr. Walsh was famous for discovering talented artists and helping them build careers. Thank you," Maya managed to say, shaking the offered hand. Her own hand felt rough and calloused compared to Dr. Walsh's soft fingers. "Where did you study?" Dr. Walsh asked, sitting down on the chair someone had brought over for her. "That composition was extraordinary. The technical skill combined with the emotional depth, I haven't heard anything like it in years." Maya felt her throat tighten. "I didn't really study anywhere. I mean, I had lessons in high school, and I was supposed to go to State University on a scholarship, but..." She trailed off, not sure how to explain the complicated story of the past few years. "But life got in the way," Dr. Walsh finished gently. "I understand. That happens to more young artists than people realize." Meanwhile, Harrison had finally found his voice again. "I don't understand what's happening here," he said, his tone sharp but lacking the cruel confidence from before. "She's a waitress. She spilled water on my table." Dr. Walsh turned to look at him, and her expression cooled considerably. "Mr. Harrison, that young woman just gave one of the most moving performances I've heard in a very long time. The fact that she happens to work as a waitress doesn't change her extraordinary talent." "It was just a song," Harrison said, but his voice sounded uncertain now. "It wasn't just a song," said another voice from the table. The man in glasses had stood up and was walking over to join the conversation. "I'm James Chen, and I teach music. Composition at the conservatory downtown. What she just played was a masterpiece. The way she used dissonance to represent emotional conflict and then resolved it into those beautiful harmonies. It's graduate-level work." Maya felt dizzy. These people were talking about her music like it was something important, something that mattered. She had spent so long thinking of herself as just a waitress who used to play piano that she had almost forgotten she was actually a musician. "I need to sit down," she said quietly, and Dr. Walsh immediately guided her to an empty chair. Mr. Peterson had come into the room now, looking worried. "Is everything all right in here? Maya, are you okay?" "She's more than okay," Dr. Walsh said firmly. "She's brilliant." "Mr. Peterson, is it? How long has Maya been working for you?" "Almost 2 years," he replied, glancing nervously at Harrison. "She's one of our best employees." Very reliable, always on time, never complains about working extra shifts. And in all that time, did you know she could compose and perform music like this? Mr. Peterson looked embarrassed. Well, I knew she had studied music before she came to work here. She played the piano a little during her interview, but I had no idea she was this talented. Maya watched this conversation happening around her like she was in a dream. People were talking about her talent and her future, but she was still stuck on the reality of her situation. Tomorrow morning, she would still need to wake up early to take her mother to the doctor's appointment. Next week, she would still need to pay the rent. Her life wasn't going to change just because she had played one song. Harrison seemed to be thinking along the same lines. This is all very touching, he said, his voice regaining some of its earlier edge. But let's be realistic here. She works in a restaurant because she needs money. Art doesn't pay the bills. Doctor. Walsh turned to face him fully, and Maya could see fire in her eyes. Mr. Harrison, art absolutely can pay the bills when it's nurtured and supported properly. The Walsh Foundation has helped dozens of young musicians build sustainable careers. You want to help her? Harrison asked with a bitter laugh. How much money are we talking about here? A few $100s for some lessons? I'm talking about a full scholarship to any music school she chooses, Dr. Walsh said calmly. Plus, a living stipend for her and her family, and connections to some of the best musicians and composers in the country. The room fell silent again. Maya felt like she couldn't breathe. Full scholarship, living stipend. Those words seemed impossible, like they belonged to someone else's life. There has to be a catch, Harrison said suspiciously. Nobody gives away money like that for one performance. The only catch, Dr. Walsh replied, is that Maya has to want it. Pursuing a career in music is hard work, even with financial support. It requires dedication and sacrifice. Maya found her voice at last. Sacrifice, she repeated softly. I've been sacrificing for 2 years. I gave up my scholarship when my dad got sick. I've been working double shifts to pay for my mom's medical bills and keep food on the table. I thought I was sacrificing my music for my family. She looked around, the room at all the faces staring at her. But maybe I was really sacrificing my ability to help my family by giving up on music. Harrison shook his head. That's ridiculous. You can't support a family on music. It's not practical. Mr. Harrison, said James Chen, the composition teacher, I make a very good living teaching and composing. So do most of my colleagues. Maya has the kind of talent that could open doors to performance careers, composition commissions, teaching positions at universities. The music world needs people like her. Maya thought about her mother at home, probably asleep in her chair in front of the television. She thought about all the nights she had lain awake worrying about money and medical bills and whether she was strong enough to keep carrying the weight of everything by herself. What if there was another way? What if she didn't have to choose between music and taking care of her family? I would need to think about it, Maya said carefully, and I would need to talk to my mother. She's been depending on me since my father died. Of course, Dr. Walsh said immediately. This is a big decision. Take all the time you need, but Maya, I want you to know that opportunities like this don't come along very often. When someone has a gift like yours, it's almost a responsibility to share it with the world. Harrison was looking more and more uncomfortable as the conversation continued. His business dinner had turned into something completely different, and he was no longer the center of attention. Worse, he was starting to look like the villain of the story. I think we should get back to our dinner, he said stiffly. We have important business to discuss. But his guests were still focused on Maya. Dr. Walsh was already pulling out her business card, and James Chen was talking about setting up an audition at the conservatory. Maya realized that in the span of 20 minutes, her entire life had changed direction. The question now was whether she had the courage to follow where it might lead. Maya clutched Dr. Walsh's business card so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The elegant cardstock felt surreal in her rough hands, like holding a ticket to a completely different life. Around her, the private dining room had transformed into something that felt more like a backstage meeting than a business dinner. Harrison's other guests had abandoned any pretense of returning to their original conversation. The Japanese investors he had been trying to impress were now more interested in Maya than in his business proposals. One of them, a distinguished man with silver hair, approached Maya with a gentle bow. "Miss, I am Hiroshi Tanaka," he said in careful English. "In Japan, we have great respect for artists who honor their families through sacrifice. Your music speaks of this honor. It is very beautiful." Maya felt tears starting to form in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means so much to me." Harrison watched this interaction with growing frustration. His carefully planned evening was falling apart, and he was powerless to stop it. "Can we please focus on why we're all here?" he said loudly. "We have contracts to discuss, deals to close. This is supposed to be a business meeting." Dr. Walsh looked at him with barely concealed disgust. "Mr. Harrison, sometimes business takes a backseat to human decency. What you did to this young woman was completely inappropriate." "I asked her to play piano," Harrison shot back. "How is that inappropriate?" "You humiliated her in front of a room full of people," James Chen said firmly. "You used your power to try to embarrass someone who was just doing her job. That's not leadership, that's bullying." Maya could see Harrison's face turning red. She had never seen a wealthy, powerful person get called out like this before. In her experience, people, like Harrison, always got their way. Watching him squirm was both satisfying and terrifying. Mr. Peterson, who had been quietly observing from the corner, finally stepped forward. "Mr. Harrison, I think it would be best if you and your party finished your evening elsewhere. Maya is one of my employees, and I won't tolerate her being treated this way in my restaurant." Maya's mouth fell open. Mr. Peterson was kicking out his most expensive customers. For her, she had always known he was a good man, but this was beyond anything she had expected. "You're throwing us out?" Harrison asked in disbelief. "Do you have any idea how much money I spend here?" "Not enough to justify treating my staff like entertainment," Mr. Peterson replied calmly. "Your meal is on the house tonight. Please don't come back." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Harrison looked around at his guests, expecting support, but found none. Dr. Walsh was still focused on Maya. The Japanese investors were whispering among themselves in their own language. Even his own business associates looked embarrassed by his behavior. "Fine," Harrison said through gritted teeth. "This place is overrated anyway." He grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair and headed toward the door. "Anyone who wants to discuss real business can meet me at the Metropolitan Club." None of his guests moved to follow him. Harrison paused at the doorway, realizing he was leaving alone. For a moment, Maya almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "This isn't over," he said, looking directly at Maya. "People like you don't just get to skip to the front of the line because you can play a pretty song. People like me?" Maya found herself standing up, surprising everyone, including herself. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Harrison's eyes narrowed. "I mean people who think they deserve something for nothing. You work in a restaurant because that's where you belong. Playing dress-up with rich people won't change that." The room fell deadly silent. Maya felt anger rising in her chest like a tide. Not just anger at Harrison's words, but anger at every person who had ever made her feel small. Every customer who had looked through her like she was invisible. Every time someone had assumed she wasn't smart enough or good enough or worthy enough. "You're right about one thing," Maya said, her voice steady and clear. "I do work in a restaurant. I've been working since I was 16 years old. I've cleaned houses, walked dogs, and waited tables. I've worked double shifts when my feet were so swollen I could barely stand. I've smiled at rude customers and pretended their insults didn't hurt because I needed every single tip." She took a step toward Harrison, and he actually backed up slightly. "But you know what? Every hour I worked, every sacrifice I made, every dream I put on hold was for my family. That's not asking for something for nothing. That's earning every single thing I have through blood, sweat, and tears. You wouldn't last one day living my life." Dr. Walsh was smiling now, and James Chen was nodding approvingly. The Japanese investors, looked impressed by Maya's courage. "And another thing," Maya continued, her confidence growing with each word. "I don't need your permission to deserve better. I don't need you to validate my talent or my dreams. The music I played tonight came from experiences you couldn't buy with all your money. It came from real life, real pain, real love. That's something you can't fake or purchase or inherit." Harrison's face was now completely red. "You think you're better than me because you've had a hard life? I built my company from nothing. I know what real work looks like." "Maybe you did work hard once," Maya said. "But somewhere along the way you forgot that other people are working hard too. You forgot that the person serving your food or cleaning your office or parking your car might have dreams and talents and stories that would amaze you if you bothered to listen." The room erupted in applause again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just appreciation for musical talent. It was admiration for Maya's courage to stand up for herself and everyone like her. Harrison stood in the doorway for another moment, clearly wanting to have the last word, but unable to think of anything to say that wouldn't make him look worse. Finally, he turned and walked out, leaving his guests behind. As soon as he was gone, the atmosphere in the room completely changed. People began talking excitedly, and Maya found herself surrounded by new friends and supporters. "That was magnificent," Dr. Walsh said, taking Maya's hands in hers. "You have more than musical talent. You have strength and dignity and wisdom. Those qualities will serve you well in whatever path you choose." Mr. Tanaka approached again, this time with a business card of his own. "Miss, I would very much like to discuss bringing you to Japan for a cultural exchange program. We have partnerships with music schools there that would be honored to work with someone of your caliber." Maya's head was spinning. Japan? Cultural exchange? 2 hours ago, her biggest worry was whether she would make enough in tips to buy groceries tomorrow. Now people were talking about international opportunities and scholarship programs. James Chen was scribbling something on a napkin. "Maya, I want you to have my personal phone number. Call me tomorrow and we'll set up a time for you to visit the conservatory. I'd like to introduce you to some of my colleagues." Maya looked around the room at all these successful, accomplished people who were suddenly interested in helping her. It felt surreal, like she had stepped through a magic doorway into someone else's life. But underneath the excitement and disbelief, she felt something else growing. For the first time in years, she felt hope. Real, tangible hope that maybe her story didn't have to end with sacrifice and compromise. Maybe, just maybe, it was only beginning. 3 months later, Maya stood backstage at the city's most prestigious concert hall, smoothing down the fabric of her first real evening gown. The black dress had been a gift from Dr. Walsh, who insisted that Maya needed something special for her debut performance with the City Symphony. Maya could hardly believe she was the same person who used to serve water and clear tables. Through the curtains, she could hear the audience settling into their seats. 800 people had come to hear the premiere of her composition, Songs My Father Never Heard. The piece had grown from the music she played that night at the Golden Oak, expanded into a full 20-minute work for piano and orchestra. 5 minutes, Maya, called the stage manager, a kind woman who had been coaching Maya through her pre-performance nerves all week. Maya took a deep breath and looked at herself in the mirror. Her reflection showed someone she was still getting used to. Gone were the tired eyes and worried expression she had worn for so long. In their place was a face that looked confident, hopeful, excited about the future. The past few months had been a whirlwind of changes. Dr. Walsh had been true to her word about the scholarship and the living stipend. Maya had been able to quit her job at the restaurant, though she still visited Mr. Peterson regularly. He had hired a pianist to play during dinner service now, inspired by Maya's story. The conservatory had accepted her into their graduate program with full funding. James Chen had become not just her teacher but a mentor and friend. He had helped her refine her composition and had introduced her to the conductor of the City Symphony, who immediately wanted to premiere her work. But the biggest change had been at home. Maya's mother, Rosa, had been skeptical at first when Maya explained about the scholarship and the opportunities. She had worried that Maya was giving up steady income for an uncertain future. But when she saw her daughter practicing piano again, saw the light return to her eyes, she understood that this was the right choice. The medical bills were still being paid, but now through the Foundation's family support program rather than Maya's restaurant wages. Rosa had even started taking art classes at the community center, something she had always wanted to do but never had time for when she was working 2 jobs to help support the family. Maya heard the orchestra tuning up and felt the familiar flutter of butterflies in her stomach. She thought about that night 3 months ago when Harrison had tried to humiliate her. What he had meant as punishment had turned out to be the moment her life changed forever. She had heard through Dr. Walsh that Harrison's business deal with the Japanese investors had fallen through. Apparently, Mr. Tanaka had told his colleagues about Harrison's behavior at the restaurant, and they had decided they didn't want to work with someone who treated people that way. Maya didn't feel happy about Harrison's misfortune, but she did feel a sense of justice. Maya? Dr. Walsh appeared at her dressing room door, elegant as always in a silver gown. How are you feeling? Nervous, Maya admitted. What if they don't like it? What if I mess up? Dr. Walsh smiled and took Maya's hands just like she had that first night. Do you remember what you told Mr. Harrison about your music coming from real experiences? That's still true. You're not performing for critics tonight, you're sharing your story with people who need to hear it. Maya nodded, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. Dr. Walsh was right. The music was the same music that had moved people in the restaurant that night. It was honest and real, and that was all that mattered. There's someone here tonight I think you'll want to see, Dr. Walsh said with a mysterious smile. She led Maya to the edge of the stage where she could peek through the curtains at the audience. In the 3rd row, Maya spotted a familiar face. It was Carlos, the dishwasher from the Golden Oak, wearing what was obviously his best suit. Next to him sat several other people from the restaurant staff, all dressed up for their first symphony concert. Maya felt tears prick her eyes. These were the people who had believed in her when she was just a tired waitress who hummed while she worked. They had pooled their money to buy tickets to her concert because they wanted to celebrate her success. Mr. Peterson arranged it, Dr. Walsh explained quietly. He said they were the first people to hear your music, so they should be here for your official debut. Maya wiped her eyes carefully, trying not to smudge her makeup. In the front row, she could see her mother sitting with James Chen and Mr. Tanaka, who had flown in from Japan specifically for the performance. The sight of Rosa wearing her best dress and looking proud instead of worried made Maya's heart swell. Places, everyone, called the stage manager. Maya walked toward the piano that waited in the spotlight. The same butterflies were in her stomach, but now they felt different. They felt like excitement instead of fear. As she sat down at the bench and adjusted the height, Maya thought about the journey that had brought her here. All those years of practice as a child, the scholarship she had earned and then given up, the long nights at the restaurant wondering if she would ever play music again. The moment when Harrison's cruelty had accidentally become the push she needed to remember who she really was. The conductor raised his baton, and the orchestra began the opening measures. Maya counted the beats until her entrance, her hands poised above the keys. When the moment came, she began to play. The music that filled the concert hall was the same music she had played in the restaurant, but it had grown. It was bigger now, supported by strings and brass and woodwinds, but it was still fundamentally her story. It still spoke of sacrifice and struggle and love and hope. As she played, Maya could feel the audience listening in a way that went beyond polite appreciation. They were hearing something that spoke to their own experiences of loss and resilience. She could sense people crying in the darkness beyond the stage lights, and she knew they were crying not just for her story, but for their own. When the final notes faded away, the silence seemed to last forever. Then the applause began, starting softly and growing until it filled every corner of the concert hall. People stood up, cheering and clapping, and Maya saw that even some of the orchestra members were wiping their eyes. She stood up from the piano bench and took her bow, looking out at all the faces in the audience. In the 3rd row, Carlos was clapping so hard she thought his hands might be sore tomorrow. In the front row, her mother was crying and laughing at the same time. Maya realized that this moment wasn't really an ending. It was a beginning. There would be more compositions to write, more performances to give, more students to teach someday. There would be challenges and setbacks and moments of doubt. But she also knew that she would never again forget who she was or what she was capable of. The girl who had sacrificed her dreams for her family had learned that sometimes the best way to honor those sacrifices is to dream even bigger. As the applause continued, Maya thought about all the other people out there who were working hard and dreaming quietly, waiting for their moment to shine. She hoped that her story might give them hope, might remind them that it's never too late to remember who you really are. The little girl who had once sat at an old piano in a tiny apartment, playing for her father while he smiled and called her magical, had finally come home.